Okay, can you go ahead and do a roll call?
Mr. Weddleton?
Here.
Ms. Kennedy?
Here.
Mr. Peterson?
Present.
Mr. Constant?
Here.
Mr. Dunbar?
Here, and also say that Mrs. Alto texted me and said that although she's appearing here, she's having tech issues.
Okay. Okay, and then for non-committee members, Mr. Rivera? Mr. Perez-Verdia? Ms. Allard? Ms. LaFrance? Chair, you have a quorum.
All right, thank you. Can we go through other people here, starting with staff?
Good morning. Can people hear me?
Sounds like Chris Schutte.
Yes, good morning. Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. You're joined today by a host of MOA staff, Michelle McNulty, Planning Director, Ryan Yell, Planning, David Whitfield, Planning, Jack Frost, Chief Code Enforcement, John Kraft, Traffic Director, Kent Colhase, PM&E Director, and Greg Soule, our Private Development Director. And if I missed anybody from the MOA side, please chime in. Thank you.
That's quite a team. Okay, thank you. And then I think as we go through, we should try for the record to identify ourselves when we speak, to some extent, so people know when they listen to the recording. So the first thing, we got the agenda before us. Any from the committee, any changes to the agenda? Try to watch the chat here.
John, it's Jamie Allard. I didn't know if you called the roll, but I'm here.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jamie. We did call roll. Sorry, we missed you. Yeah, hang on a sec. I'm trying to get into the chat here just so I can watch it. Okay, all right, got that. All right, thanks. So I don't hear any changes to the agenda. So the first thing on the agenda is the proposed ordinance to allow roll curbed and small subdivisions. We had that presented on the agenda at our last meeting, and then but moved on from it. And I'll because I'll speak to it for a moment. But then, Chris, did you want to address the memo you sent out and the various aspects of this afterwards? Chris Schutte?
That'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, and we may have some people on from the home builders too. So if we'll go through, then hear from Chris, and then I'll see if who from the home builders might be here and see if they could comment on it, and then see where the discussion leads. So this did come as a request from the home builders, and it just briefly addresses a couple of things on some subdivisions, and it really just focuses on smaller subdivisions. That and what happens is the when they subdivide and identify the different lots, that then it goes in a process where a builder will build on the lot, and you really know when the lot is sold what house will be on there, what design will be on, where the garage will be, and that determines where the driveway will be. So if in the process of development vertical curbs are put up, then they have to be torn out to create the roll curb or in a ramp for the driveway, so adding on to the expense. So they're looking for some kind of balance between not having any vertical curbs and allowing, at least in small subdivisions, to have roll curbs. So that's the kind of brief story on this. But Chris, do you want to go through? Well, here, I'll just let you take it away. Go ahead, Chris Schutte.
Yes, good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. Lucky for all of you, you're not going to hear a lot from me today. I'm going to pass the baton through the various disciplines that are represented today by the department directors. And we're going to begin with Michelle McNulty in the planning department, who delivered, I apologize for the late delivery, but delivered a memo summarizing some of the concerns from a planning perspective on a transition to de facto type 2 curb adoption. And it will touch on other disciplines as well, represented by directors from traffic and PM&E and private development. And so it will be a collaborative discussion to walk through the concerns in the planning memo, but also to talk about some of the specifics of the draft code amendment that is being proposed and perhaps ways that it could be tweaked or improved. So at that, I'm going to go back on mute and let Michelle McNulty begin the presentation. Thank you, Michelle.
Great.
Okay, just briefly, sorry, Michelle, as Meg Zolotel is here live and ready. Tech issue solved. Go ahead, Michelle.
Okay, great. Thank you. And just for the record, this is Michelle McNulty, the planning director for the Municipality of Anchorage. So thanks. We had the opportunity to review the proposed language, and kind of as written, we have some concerns as the planning department. I won't go over I won't read to you the memo line for line, but you know, one of the things to keep in mind is that Title 21 implements our adopted plans, whether it be a comprehensive plan and any element of the comprehensive plan, which includes transportation plans, pedestrian plans, neighborhood district plans. And so for various points that we've taken out of what our adopted plans identify as, what the community has identified as kind of the visions they want for our community, really Title 21 code should implement that. And so one concern is that, you know, vertical curbs were an intentional choice to kind of move along some of these goals of creating pedestrian, safer, and more easy to use pedestrian environments. And really the integrity of a sidewalk really is kind of integral to that vertical barrier curb. Mostly because of its ability to, not in every case, but mostly prevent people from parking up on the curb. You know, rolled curbs allow a much easier transition for a driver. So if they want to get kind of further out of a drive lane, and then oftentimes they're up on the sidewalk or in the separated path, which forces people into the street. And then we've been, you know, as we've been working on several projects, specifically the Title 21 parking project, where we're looking at reducing parking significantly, on-site parking, which truly does have an extraordinary cost to developers. You know, one of the attributes that makes this possible and more appealing to the community is that with that requirement for vertical curb, we are moving in that direction of allowing more cars to be parked on the street, but also providing that pedestrian safety. So, you know, eliminating the vertical curb entirely concerns us that it's actually in conflict not only with the comp plans and elements of it, but also the project that we're working on, trying to reduce the burden of providing as much on-site parking to developers. And then just anecdotally, what we've heard back a lot from the community as we've been working on that project, as well as the R2 amendment project, is that the public really does, it's a real concern to them about where they're seeing rolled curbs. They're also seeing more drivers parking on the sidewalks and creating a unwelcoming walking environment for neighbors. And I think that pretty much sums up the memo, and I'm happy to answer any questions or elaborate where necessary.
All right, thank you. Any questions from the committee?
John,
Chris, go ahead. Crystal?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
I have a question just in regard to whether or not it is a violation of any kind of muni code to park a vehicle on a sidewalk.
It is, but I think that either John Krabs or if someone from code enforcement is here, they might be able to better speak to that, but it is in fact illegal.
Okay, thank you.
You want to follow up with that, Crystal, or?
No, if that's, it's simple yes
Okay.
or no is a good answer. So thanks. And the answer
Okay.
is yes, it's illegal. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, go ahead. Constant?
Yeah, thank you. I see that Dean is in the queue first, so.
Oh, I'm sorry, missed that. Oh, okay, Dean, go ahead. Thanks, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Well, I don't mind getting my clients go first, but since you called me, I guess my question, it's sort of two parts. I was reading the amendment language for the code in the curbs and gutters section, and the full section isn't there. There's actually another part to this section in code right now that has an exception about the rolled curb variety for cul-de-sacs. So I think that maybe you just need to include that there so the full language is there. So that's just a comment part. But my question is, reading this, it refers to the standard specifications, for the identification and I guess definition of what is a rolled curb variety. And I kind of was looking for that on the development services page and the project management and engineering page, and project management and engineering section maintains and updates the MASS, but I don't find the document there on their page. So I guess just one concern is being able to find it, exactly what it is described as and defined as. And then the second part of that is, well, curb type 2 and type 1, but are there other types? I guess I would like to see a full list so we understand where we are. But in addition to that, this is only for residential minor streets. And I'm assuming that that's not going to be street like, like the bar or perhaps even one that enters the subdivision, but more of the internal subdivision residential streets only. So it's very limited application as I kind of read it. And but are there different types of residential minor streets? It would be nice to have a definition of what that is exactly, so we can see how broad the scope of this rolled curb proposal is. Because I think that there might be some, I'm reading that it's broader than it really is. And then I did have a question for Ms. McNulty, and I totally get that concern about driving up a rolled curb to park partly on the sidewalk. For pedestrian-friendly areas and so forth, isn't there also like a little buffer in a lot of street to sidewalk transitions, a little buffer area of grass or something, or planters, so there's not necessarily the rolled curb and the sidewalk adjacent to each other, but isn't that part of the design specs?
Yeah, so Dean, I think you're talking about a separated sidewalk where you have a grass area between the back of curb and the sidewalk. And ideally, that is the design that we would have. It's not always the case. It does depend on the road classification, but that is not always the case. But that ideally would be what we're seeing is curb, some type of a separated area, sidewalk, and then hopefully enough room from where the house or building is situated from the property line, that there's also enough room for someone to park in their driveway and not be overhanging into the sidewalk. And that is one of the challenges that you sometimes see when you have that separated sidewalk. And I think John Craps has some visuals on that. I think Greg Soule might be able to better speak to kind of the subdivision types, but yeah, to some extent it is going to be not your debars, it's going to be internal subdivisions, but at the number I think that we're seeing now, these would be pretty large subdivisions, 50 units or 50 lots or more. And so some neighborhoods would definitely see the rolled curb. And then the other thing would be that, we do have this, it would still be applicable even if we reduce the number in some of our urban areas where you do see more kind of sidewalk and calling for more pedestrian amenities. So.
All right,
Mr.
thank you.
Chairman, this is
Any,
Kurt- this is
go ahead,
Shooty.
Kurt or Chris?
Yeah, Dean, there were a lot of questions in there, and I don't know that we touched on all of them. But as a visual person myself, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to hand the screen to Greg Soule to talk about the types of curbs to help orient folks. And then perhaps, Greg, if you've got the screen going, you can also move into the residential minor streets definition and the threshold that's set by the proposed code amendment versus some other thresholds that exist in code.
Mr. Chair, before we dive into the presentation, I would love to add a
Sure,
couple
go ahead, Chris.
So, you know, in my district, there's a clearly delineated line. It's not quite red, but it's pretty close to red, in which to the west, you have amazing landscape buffers between the sidewalks and the houses. And then on the other side of that line that probably should be red, you have rolled curbs and people parking and, you know, code enforcement saying we can't deal with that, it's cars. Then you have to call the police. The community service officer comes when they can get there and tickets the cars that are parked on the sidewalk, but the cars don't move. And so there's a fundamental inequity issue going on in this town in the way that roll curbs have been implemented, at least in the historic districts. And so I would love in the presentation to see what that looks like. Hopefully the photographs capture some of that. But in any case, in discussions with the home builders who I don't see here, which is kind of weird, I would suggest that there needs to be an amendment that addresses the historic districts that have alley access for the utilities and the various other elements, because it's not fair that we continue to perpetuate a system where poor neighborhoods get weaker, lesser infrastructure.
All right, thanks, Chris. So, Forrest, did you want to go before the presentation?
Yeah, I just really quickly, I think Chris partially answered the question I had of the administration, which I'll ask at the end, but I want to make a comment. I think the distinction between my district and Chris's is that many neighborhoods in my district don't have sidewalks at all. I mean, we have large, dense districts with basically there are sidewalks along the DOT roads or along the very large, the very large arterials. But as soon as you get back into the neighborhoods, there's no sidewalk at all. And obviously that we are requiring rolled curb now when we're building out these new subdivisions. But that rolled curb to me is far preferable to no sidewalks at all. And we want to have at least some pedestrian facilities. We want to do it in a more affordable way. So I think that there is a sort of tension there. But I guess I am supportive of this in part because I've seen areas where there's no sidewalks at all. My question is, and again, I think Chris answered this, but for the administration, who can write those tickets? And what would an amendment to that look like? Are we prevented by one of those old citizens initiatives from doing it? Because it seems like that's a pretty easy way to resolve this. If people are parking along the sidewalk where they shouldn't, you go through there one day and you just leave a note that says, you know, it's illegal to park on the sidewalk. You give them a warning, and the next day you go through and you ticket folks. But to drive up the cost of housing because of improper people breaking the law with their vehicles, to me doesn't make a lot of sense. So I guess, is there anyone from the administration that could speak to that about who exactly could, in a neighborhood, let's say in East Anchorage, who could ticket someone who's parking on the sidewalks?
Jack, do you want to take a swing at that?
Yeah, vehicle regulations are enforced by the Anchorage Police Department.
Jack, is that something that is in code, or is that, I mean, I know there've been some fights about this kind of thing, but is it something that was put in there by citizens initiative, or is it something that we could potentially change if we wanted to?
The charter was amended so that other folks could, peace officers could help with abandoned and junk type vehicles. But as far as parking regulations, it's in John Crafts, I think you can weigh in on this. It's in Title 9 or 8, yeah, Title 9 rather. Mhm.
Yeah, this is John Kratz, acting traffic engineer. There was an initiative, but I'm not a legal expert, so I don't know if that applies to parked vehicles. But right now, the only people that can ticket vehicles would be the police department, and I don't know, to tell you the truth, Forrest, whether it's that could be changed or not.
And as a follow-on, if I may, it's a resourcing issue as well. Regardless of who has the responsibility, the resources have to be available to and dedicated to do that, which comes back to budget, et cetera. So.
Yeah, I understand that, and I appreciate that. I think the what we're trying to balance here is affordable housing construction, and if we're not building housing and we're not building subdivisions, then sort of all this kind of becomes moot to me. But all right, thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thanks, Forrest. So Jamie, I have you next, but Dean has a comment specifically on this, so I'm going to jump to him real quick. Dean, go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Just really quick about the parking enforcement issue. We did have a charter amendment that allowed some delegation of parking enforcement to people other than police officers, but the delegation authority is very limited. It's only limited to a certain area downtown, and that's been in place for a while. The recent charter amendments allow delegation to a service area that had parking as part of its services, and that was mostly targeted to the Goodwood Valley service area. And then the delegation was also for abandoned and junk vehicles. So I actually don't think that outside of these areas, which is most of the Anchorage Bowl, that you would still require police to issue a ticket for someone parking on the sidewalk. But, you know, this is sort of a rough, off-the-cuff interpretation. But I think that we would have maybe right-of-way enforcement, but to do a parking enforcement would require a police officer removed to the bowl.
Okay, thank you, Dean. Jamie, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, John. So I am having this sort of issue right now in Eagle River. Apparently there's a blockage, and so there was an officer that was called out to the scene to ticket, and they did ticket and said to the person, you have to move your boat, it's blocking the sidewalk. But then the officer went on to say, after he was called out again, that it was out of his hands, the police officer. So they did call in our I guess our neighborhood watch people, and they said, well, we can't do anything. So I'm kind of fighting that battle right now, trying to figure out because I looked at it, it's code, I believe 9.30.030. So we got to figure out, are the police supposed to do this, or are we going to set up another team? Because right now I'm in a battle trying to figure this out. So any suggestions on how we're going to continue to handle this would be greatly appreciated.
Well, it's interesting. Okay, I see your note, Meg. Let's maybe get to that. That may be covered in the presentation. Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, and I'll be brief. I mean, if you want to entertain yourself a little bit, it's like a video game. Go to Google Maps, hover over Fairview, and just count the cars in the one satellite snapshot parked on the sidewalks.
Okay. All right. Maybe after the meeting. Thanks. So Chris Schutte, did you want to go through or whoever to do that presentation?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'm going to ask Greg Soule to briefly educate us on the types of curbs, and then given the current discussion around sidewalks and rolled curbs and what happens or doesn't happen with those, I would next turn it over to John Kraft, the municipal acting traffic engineer, who does have a visual slideshow for us that helps illuminate that issue. So Greg, do you want to start first? Greg Soule, are you able to pull up your screen again?
I'm sorry, I was on mute. Mr. Chair, Mr. Gates there. I'll try to answer most of your questions. If I missed one, please let me know. But the curb types are defined in Mass, the Municipality of Anchorage standard specifications. In the Division 3, let's see here. Can everyone see that?
No.
Can you make it a little bit
There we
larger,
go.
Greg? We can see your screen, but it's a little small.
Okay. That. These are the two types that we're basically discussing here. This is the vertical type 1 barrier curb, and this is the rolled curb, otherwise known as type 2. As you can see, type 2 is more of a mountable curb, much more easy to drive over. Barrier curb actually has a 6-inch difference between the gutter pan and the top of the curb, so it's a little more difficult for a car to mount. It's still possible, but it's more difficult, and most smaller cars are very discouraged from doing that. So that's defined in Mass, and the Title 21 code references Mass and the design criteria manual, so that's where that gets tied in. As far as the separations go, that is also defined pretty well in Title 21, Chapter 8. This table, let's see, 2107. And it's basically dependent upon whether or not there is on-street parking available on the street. So as a general rule, the attached sidewalks are only allowed where there is on-street parking, and that's a function of the street width. So as you can see here, the separation is generally 0 to 7 feet for a sidewalk, and then down here trails, it's also 7 feet. That's our general separation requirement. If the street's wide enough to accommodate on-street parking, we do allow attached curb. I'm sorry, attached sidewalk. Let's see. What were your other specific questions, Mr. Gates? And you were asking about the curb types and also the sidewalk separation. It had to do with residential minor streets.
Yeah, Greg, could you?
Yeah,
quickly,
is there a definition and are there two types of them?
So on residential minor streets, which are classified as 500 ADT or less, basically the code does require sidewalks on both sides of the road, and that applies to all streets except for cul-de-sacs. In cul-de-sacs, we do have different ADT thresholds that allow for sidewalks on one side or sidewalks on no side. So in cul-de-sacs that have ADT less than 150, sidewalks are not required. And then on cul-de-sacs with ADT between 150 and 500, sidewalks are only required on one street.
Mr. Chair, point of order constant here. What is ADT acronyms?
ADT stands for average daily trips, and that is basically the traffic that's anticipated from a subdivision, and that's calculated through the Institute of Traffic Engineering has a trip generation calculation manual. And basically, as a rule of thumb, you can assume we say about 9 ADT per single family home. That varies when it comes to duplexes and triplexes and whatnot. But for most of the developments we're talking about here, we'd assume about 9 ADT per lot. So as proposed, the ordinance states anything under 500 ADT would require rolled curb, and basically, so that would equate to about 55 lots or so. So, and that would encompass, I would say, about 100% of the private developments that you see.
Okay, Greg, do you have more?
No, I think that covers it.
Okay, Meg, did you want to go ahead?
All right, I think I'm off mute. Sorry, I'm having a lot of tech issues today. So my two questions are around, are there any differences with regards to snow removal in terms of the two different curb types we're talking about? I know, just on my own street, although we have the higher curbs, like basically we don't get our sidewalks in the winter time, they're snow storage. But I just was wondering if there's any policy issues or practical implications of curb type and snow plowing, because we do plow a lot of snow. And the other is the cost differential between the two different types of sidewalk, both in terms of the initial laying of the sidewalk, the cost to build it, but also any maintenance or replacement, like lifespan of.
This is Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. Unfortunately, I don't see Paul Van Landingham here from Street Maintenance. However, I will share that from previous discussions we've had with Street Maintenance and the Home Builders Association, Street Maintenance does prefer fewer obstructions when they're out there with their giant graders. So type 2 curbs are easier for them to plow over than a type 1, which is a vertical barrier that they must be cognizant of when they're dropping the blades. But that's just simply something they have to account for in various neighborhoods. Obviously, they try to be deliberate and careful when plowing in Rogers Park. They have a little bit more leeway and freedom in my neighborhood, for example, in East Anchorage, which has rolled curbs to actually scrape up above the curb. So it is easier from a maintenance perspective to utilize type 2 for plowing. As to your question about the cost, I see Kent Colhayes is on here from PM&E. Kent was recently looking at the bid tabs, the tabs of different bids that we get at the municipality for our construction projects, some of which utilize type 1 and type 2 curbs. Kent, do you want to chime in on cost?
Yes, thank you, Chris, through the chair, to Ms. Zalatel and others. So PM&E maintains bid information for all projects that are bid every year, and I was looking through those here recently. And in general, right now, we are not keeping bid tabs that differentiate between type 1 and type 2, but in years past we did. And I would say that on average, it appears that type 1 curb is perhaps 10 to 20% more expensive per linear foot based on the average of bid tabs than type 2 rolled curb. And for reference, those costs are around, say, between $30 and $40 a running foot of curb. So for an average lot frontage, perhaps the difference is, $500 or $600 or $700. And these are just general numbers I'm using. The other cost that just through our discussions with the home builders that we've heard them talk about is their belief that they would need to come back later, or a homeowner would need to come back later and remove type 1 curb in order to install a driveway if the driveway curb cut was not placed in the correct position at the time the subdivision was built. So I presume that's a possibility that could occur, but most of the subdivisions we're talking about are places like the Terraces and Resolution Point and others with standard lots that are 70 or 75 feet wide. So there is not a lot of opportunity for varying driveway placements anyway. So, one approach, not to speak for the home builders, but one approach could be to just install driveways in varying locations on different lots and leave it to the home builders, the home buyers rather, to purchase a lot that aligns with their desired home type and their garage location. So anyway, a quick summary: two costs. One is the slight increase in cost for installing type 1 versus type 2. The other is the cost the home builders could incur if they have to move a driveway. And then I think the last question you had was regarding maintenance, and I think Type 1 curbs probably bear a little more brunt from snow removal operations, and they become abraded and chipped. I think for street maintenance, when they go in and replace curbs that are damaged, there would be no cost difference for them to replace a Type 1 versus a Type 2 curb.
All right, thank you. Meg, did you want to follow up?
Yes, thank you. So are there any other infrastructure considerations with curb types? This is well outside of my, I'm not an engineer or a builder. So, as we think about storm sewers and drainage and kind of all of the other pieces that go with building a subdivision and then maintaining a subdivision for, the decades thereafter, are there any other distinct differences we should be aware of based on curb type? And I know that's really specific, but I'm curious, what other impacts other than cost and parking issues might we want to consider?
Kent, I believe that's for you and Greg.
I see Greg was coming off mute. I'll let him talk and then I'll follow up.
Through the chair, to answer your question, I would say from a drainage perspective, you do get more capacity in a vertical type curb. However, for the majority of our subdivisions, the Type 2 curb is perfectly functional from a drainage standpoint. Basically, the benefits of the Type 1 curb: you have your enhanced pedestrian safety. It keeps the parking on the road in general, and it can also be some grade issues. So if you have steeper sloped lots, occasionally the Type 1 curb can actually help the situation when you actually can bring because it raises the back of the grade behind the curb up by 6 inches. But other than that, there really is not a lot of difference. I'll defer to Kent on the rest of it.
I have nothing to add. Greg covered everything. Thank you.
All right, Meg, did you want to follow up?
No, I think I'm good on my general infrastructure questions. Thanks.
Okay, good. Dean, go ahead.
You skipped me there, Mr. Chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. Chris, go ahead.
Thanks. So to put my hat on the other side in the context of thinking like a builder, I'm glad, Kent, that you identified the cost that they've clearly stated that they have, which means when you have a curb, you put it in, if you have to then come back in and cut in a ramp, it is more expensive, and it actually kind of sacrifices the integrity of the curb itself, etc. And I want to point out kind of the not good, I guess is the best way I'll put it, thinking that I see when we as policymakers or the municipality and its infrastructure tell the builders when they're going to plan out a neighborhood subdivision that, oh, well, they can just, put in the curbs and then the builders can build around the curbs. That doesn't take into account lot sight lines, neighborhood placement of other houses. And so I think that approach isn't actually valid. It's easy to say when you hold all the chips, but it's not a fair approach to a builder and their investments in their subdivision.
All right, thanks, Chris. Kent, you wanted to comment on that?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and Mr. Constant kind of followed along after I put my comment in there, but what I was going to comment is the only time they would have to remove a section of curb and reinstall it rather, was if they were moving the driveway. So, and certainly understand your comments, Mr. Constant, and I don't necessarily disagree, but if the driveway was put in with Type 1 curb and that location was suitable for a home design and a home builder and a home purchaser, there would be no other cost to related to the installation of type 1 curb. Thank you.
And I would just follow up to that. It would be twice the cost if they had to put it in their entryway and then they had to move it because the sightlines or because the infrastructure as it comes in the final development plans forces them to. So I just want us to be real careful when we think, to make sure we think both like policy and infrastructure owners and also like the builders we're trying to support.
All right, thanks. Thanks, Chris. Dean?
Thank you. I had a question about the application of this new, if it's a passed new code amendment. I guess sort of a legal question, so I should be asking myself in a way, but I don't really know the answer off the cuff. Basically, this obviously will apply to new subdivision agreements when the new subdivision is approved and then construction begins. So that's pretty clear. But for existing subdivisions, like like Mr. Dunbar mentioned in his area, if there's road reconstruction, then is the reconstructed road need to comply with this new standard, within the subdivision? And obviously it's not going to require, rebuilding everything at once, but if a road that has a vertical curb is torn down and then rebuilt, do they need to go to this standard? And I guess that kind of begs the question, how much of a road is being rebuilt in one area? So I just wonder how, I guess, the admin folks here might see that being applied.
Through the chair, Kent Colehays and PM&E again. When PM&E or the city is reconstructing a road or taking a non-standard road and improving it to standard, we strive to comply with all the requirements of Title 21 and other code provisions. It's often more challenging in an existing subdivision, where we have dealt with that for example, in Campbellwood subdivision, where the existing driveways are very steep. And it's challenging to change from rolled curb to type 1 barrier curb because of the existing constraints of home locations and driveway grades. So there's not a blanket answer, Mr. Gates. We strive to comply. If we are unable to, we work with the planning department, and on occasion we have actually gone to the planning board for variances to the requirement for type 1 curb if we can't make it work in an existing subdivision.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Can you embellish on your comment here? You say, for example, Chugach Way.
Yeah. So, let's talk about an old neighborhood that's established, but then is suddenly going to be created as a new neighborhood, right? This then applies there, right?
Offhand, Chugach Way would have a lot more traffic. So.
Yeah, I don't mean Chugach Way, the street. I don't know the name of the development that Cook Inlet Housing is putting in there, but it's that whole project between 36th and Chugach Way. That's a whole new subdivision going into a historic kind of built area.
Ken, could you address that?
Yes, through the chair. I was going to talk specifically to Chugach Way, but Greg Soleil is on the line, and he's been working with Cook Inlet Housing on the private development that Mr. Constance is referring to. You can probably speak to it better.
Through the chair, yeah, so Chugach Way is the public road, obviously, that will be getting redeveloped, and we will be requiring type 1 barrier curb on that. The interior roads in that particular development are actually going to be private.
Okay.
So those will not be dedicated rights of way. So there's a little more flexibility there. And the CHA did apply for various variances from the 2190, which is the code that regulates the private roads. So they will be putting in, they're very non-standard. They're going to have parking attached to the roads, and they will be using barrier curb in some locations and rolled curb in other locations.
So, but let's generalize this concept to a redevelopment that fits within a historic neighborhood that has been developed for 50 or 70 years or something. This code section would apply to those developments, of course, depending on the specifics. Is that correct assumption?
It would, and as Kent described, in a redevelopment situation, the idea is to comply with the code to the maximum extent that we can. And generally what we see is a lot of these older developments, Pleasant Valley comes to mind, we have situations where we have duplexes and whatnot with really wide driveways, and the residents have become accustomed to, parking almost the full width of the lot for using that for our off-street parking. And the one thing that type 1 barrier curb does do in terms of the infrastructure is it does define the driveway entrances. And the benefit of that, I guess, is compliance with the code, which requires a maximum, it only allows for maximum driveway frontage. So when you have the rolled curb, what we'll see a lot of times is people that they'll come in after the fact and pave wider driveways that will exceed what was technically allowed when they initially got their driveway permit and the home was built. So in the older developments, we already have the pre-existing driveways that are very, very wide, and it's just the people are so used to parking along the whole frontage of the lot that it would really cause too much of a disruption to put in type 1 barrier curb and then define the driveway entrances.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Try to see that was, I don't know if anyone else, Dean, Meg, did we get to you?
My question was answered in that last one.
Okay. Okay. Thanks. So is there anything else from staff on this?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chris Schutte again. At this point, I'd like to ask John Kraft to participate, and he's got a visual slideshow that I hope we can navigate here. So John, are you able to come online?
Yes, if everybody can hear me. Okay, I'm going to try and share my screen here. I think I'd be better at this now that we've been doing this for a while. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see this.
Not quite. I see snowmen. There we go.
Takes a minute. Anyway, I want to thank the committee for allowing me to present some information here. So through the chair, this is a photograph of, this is roll curb with what we call, or type 2 curb with what we call a attached sidewalk, or we might refer to it as the sidewalk on the back of curb. And in a lot of areas where we see this, we have this problem with vehicles parking or using the sidewalk as a parking lane. Step through here. This is on Beaver and 16th. I'm trying to go slow here because I don't know how fast these are being updated on everybody's screen.
John, this is Chris. Can you also identify the areas as you show them in case people don't recognize the streets or neighborhoods?
Sure. This is Beaver and 16th. This is Casey Cusack Loop. This is Doyle Drive. So anyway, in these situations where we have vehicles parking on the sidewalk or on the pedestrian pathway, it's very difficult, as you know, to get the police to respond to these type. It's not a high priority for them, and typically when the traffic department's called, we don't have any other remedy than to encourage them to call the police department. Sometimes we get inquiries into posting no parking signs, which we try to avoid, because once we put no parking signs up, that means nobody can park there. And that's not a very popular thing with the residents in the area, because all of a sudden their guest parking and their overflow parking cease to exist. And if let's say that we did post this area no parking, all that would do is push this parking that needed to happen here on street to another street, and then those residents would complain to us that we've pushed the parking problem onto them. And anyway, it goes on and on and on. And so really the problem is, when we have this situation, we don't have a good solution to address it. And unfortunately, in these situations where we're actually providing a pedestrian facility, we're making it non-usable by vehicles just parking on the pedestrian pathway. And I'd just like to add that, you know, this is not in it just doesn't kind of follow our concept of complete streets that we have out there, where we're trying to build facilities for all users. And it also doesn't help out with our safe routes to schools, where we're trying to get parents comfortable with allowing children to walk to school instead of driving them, which creates huge problems at our schools with traffic backup during drop-off and pickup times. So you know, we're advocating for trying to keep this barrier curb and get away from this rolled curb and attached sidewalk for these problems where we have a real difficult time addressing this type of parking condition, where we have people driving up. And these, you know, I just had staff run out and take these. They're recent pictures that we just ran out a couple of days ago and shot these. And this is Lane at 5th. So I included this picture to show that, you know, it isn't always the case that we have rolled curb attached sidewalk where people aren't complying with parking. It's not always the case that people are parked up over the sidewalk, and obviously in this one it's working out real well at this time. The problem, though, is that if we did start having a problem here, you know, we don't, like I said before, we really don't have a good way to address the situation other than to put no parking up or ask them to continue to call the police department. So let's see, I'd like to share some other, let's see if I can do this without making a big mess.
Thank you, John.
Hmm?
Thank you.
John, are you done, or did you have more to
No,
show?
no. Sorry, I'm switching some shots here real quick.
Okay, well, while you're doing that, I see, Meg, did you have questions on this?
I do. I have two questions. One is, what is the width of the streets we're talking about? What's the standard width of the streets that we're looking at and we're talking about? And the second is, where are rolled curbs? If we don't make this change, where are rolled curbs currently allowed? Because what I'm hearing is some hesitancy to expand the use of rolled curbs, or are all rolled curbs currently allowed, are grandfathered in? I need just a little bit more historical context for what we're looking at.
Well, in the past, the roll curbs were allowed. I think that that has been changed in 21, and now we're requiring a barrier curb. So you see a lot of residential areas that have roll curb, and you have residential areas that don't have. They have roll curb with no sidewalks. Some have sidewalks that are attached. Some have them that are not attached. So in the past, there hasn't been a consistent, let's say, cross section of the roadway. So what we're talking about here is, you know, what are we building into the future here in new construction, and what would, from a traffic perspective, what we'd like to see is, you know, anywhere that we have a pedestrian facility being built, we'd like to see the barrier curb in to keep that parking issue from happening, where it just becomes a de facto parking area for in certain neighborhoods. And I'm not saying it happens everywhere, but it happens in a lot of places, and when it does, we just don't have a good way to address it. So this is off a bluff here, Cedar Street, and this is what we're talking about. This is what, you know, from a pure traffic perspective, what we'd like to see is barrier curb, separated sidewalk, and part of the issue with the separated sidewalk is making sure that the structure is far enough away so that we don't have people parked in the blocking the sidewalk. So let's say the garage door, you'll see this garage door, and if somebody is parked right here, they could potentially be blocking the sidewalk, which we don't want to see that either. So in some neighborhoods, when we've gone in and retrofitted added sidewalks, we've run into this problem where we've put a detached sidewalk in, and then we basically the residents' parking became one less car, which wasn't very popular. So this is off of Bluff Drive. This is barrier curb, separated sidewalk. This is Elm Street. Of course, this person, hopefully they're not parked here because they're not supposed to be parking from that fire hydrant. F Street. So this one's a little different. It's barrier curb, but looks like it's just an asphalt pathway. This is off Hollywood Drive, but it looks like it's got separated concrete sidewalks on the other side of the road. This is nice barrier curb, attached sidewalk. And this is off Ivy Street. So we included this picture just to show that even if you have barrier curbs, sometimes we still have people pull up over top of them. It's not a very, you know, it doesn't solve all of the problems, but people have a tendency not to mount these barrier curbs as much as they do roll curbs. So this is relatively new, nice new sidewalk with barrier curb and attached sidewalk. All right, I've got one more set of photos I just want to touch on real quick. If you could bear with me just for a little bit longer. Sure. Sorry, I'm
I just, while you're doing that, I want to comment. We're getting some comments, longer ones in here, and I'll read those into the record, but we need to get a recording of everything. So if you don't write too long of a comment, just get yourself in the queue, and then I'll call on you and you can state it for the recording.
All right, now I'm losing my.
Well, here, I'll go ahead and read Greg's comment, and then while you're getting that going. And he says that street width is also dependent on average daily traffic. In general, 31 feet is required for less than 300 ADT. 33 feet is required between 300 and 1,000 ADT, and 38 feet is required above 1,000. Thanks, Greg.
So these are some photos we took of, you know, rolled curb with no sidewalk. And I just wanted to show these because, you know, we're, like I said before, we're, from the traffic perspective, we'd really love to see these residential streets built with pedestrian facilities on them. It is the concept of complete streets to have separated facilities for pedestrians and walkways. And like I said, this goes along with are safe routes to school. Keep in mind that within a mile of the school, if there's a safe route, children are required to walk to the school. They're not bused by the school district. And we really don't want to see situations where children are walking down streets that are constructed like this to get to the bus stop or to walk to school. There is no pedestrian facility. They basically have to walk in the roadway. In some of these areas where we have vehicles parked on both sides of the road, there's just is nowhere else to go. And, you know, from a parent's perspective, you know, most parents look at this situation and go, I'm not going to allow my children to walk to the bus stop or to school in this situation. And then what we end up is, you know, them taking by car. And then we have this huge traffic mess at our schools with drop off and pickup because of these situations. And I really encourage you to think about, you know, making sure that these pedestrian facilities are there and they're available. They're not being blocked by vehicles. And however we get to that point, either by barrier curb or some increased enforcement, is going to help us out a lot, because we don't have any way to address this situation other than to spend a bunch of money to go in there and try and rebuild this. And then we're tasked with, like what Kent was saying, is trying to fit the sidewalks into an existing residential area that doesn't always match up real well because of slopes or the buildings being built closer to the right of way, and then the sidewalks not necessarily working. So there's a lot of issues that go along with that. So that's all I have, Mr. Weddleton. If I'll take questions if anybody has any.
Okay, that's great. Thanks. Meg has stepped out for a different meeting. Chris, you're in the, I'm sorry, Pete.
I'm in. Oh yeah, he's up there. Go ahead.
Oh, and I skipped Crystal Kennedy. Sorry. Let's back up. Crystal, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Actually, I have questions that are more related to enforcement. So if you want to go first with the people that maybe wanted to comment on some of the pictures, I do want to say I appreciate the pictures. Those were all great. So very helpful. But I'm happy to yield if somebody wants to speak directly to the pictures that John had. Thanks.
Okay, Pete. Thank you, Crystal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. And in the subdivision I live in, we had our streets rebuilt about a half a dozen years ago, and then a couple years later, they added sidewalks to one side. And the neighbors were not real enthusiastic about adding that sidewalk because it shortened their driveways, and then on top of that, and I didn't see this in any of the pictures, the post office had required that the sidewalk be separated from the curb far enough so they could stick the mailboxes in there. And I hadn't actually seen that in other neighborhoods. Is that a new rule, or just not sure about that?
Kent might have a better understanding of that. I know that for a while the post office was trying to push everybody towards cluster mailboxes because it was more efficient for them to deliver mail that way. But I don't have a recollection of the post office forcing us to do separated sidewalks. I mean, Kent might have some more information on that than I do.
And through the chair, Kent Coles, I would actually ask Greg Soule to speak to that. He recently worked on the Pleasant Valley subdivision, which went to cluster mailboxes. So Greg may have some insight.
Through the chair, that's the USPS now requires cluster mailboxes on all new subdivisions and redeveloped subdivisions. So developers are required to confer with them to figure out where they would like to place the cluster mailboxes, and basically individual mailboxes are no longer allowed. It can get a little different on redevelopment. We try to comply with that every time we can, and unless there's a lot of public outcry, we do solicit a lot of input from the stakeholders in these redevelopment projects as well. But that's where separated and attached sidewalks can also factor in as well, because the USPS now has a rule where they, on new developments, they won't step out of their trucks to step onto a sidewalk to put mail in a mailbox. So if you do have individual mailboxes at each lot, you do need a separated sidewalk essentially, so you can put this mailbox right behind the curb without interfering with the clear pathway on the sidewalk.
Okay, great, thank you.
Great, thanks, Pete. Chris?
Yeah, I would love to go back to that picture of the 2 rolled curbs and the cars parked.
Oh, you're killing me, Chris. Here, let me just see if I can pull it back up.
It's just such a good visual. So the question I have really when you see that picture, the point was made that parents have a hard time with this because their kids are forced into the streets. And so even when you have a sidewalk, there's a current condition in our city that makes this a reality all the time. Or not all the time, makes it a reality every year. And that's snow storage. And we have, and maybe this is separate from the question of the rolled curbs versus the square cut curbs, and it's not really a PM&E issue, it's more of an M&O issue. We have to have a place for the snow to go. We can't just pick it up all the time every day. Functionally speaking, we use those sides of the road as snow storage. And so the current condition, at least half the year, is that kids have to walk in the street even if we have a sidewalk, because the snow gets piled so high it turns into a berm that's lunar in quality as opposed to walkable. So I just want us to keep in mind collectively that while this picture is great for April through October, November through March, those berms are completely impassable on the side of this picture.
Great, thanks, Chris. Any comments from staff?
Yeah, I agree with you, Chris. The snow removal is an issue. I think if we don't have the sidewalks, then it becomes a moot point to have the conversation about the snow removal. There's been, different throughout the years. There's been different approaches to this. We talked to streets about, when we have separated sidewalks and they plow snow back to try to stay away from plowing snow directly onto the sidewalk. There are some residential areas that in their own covenants require the frontage property owner to keep the sidewalk clear out in front of their the residents. Doesn't always work out real well. But that is a huge issue, is that even if we've got sidewalks in there, how to keep them clear of snow. But really the bottom line is if we don't have the sidewalks, then that discussion is pretty moot, because there's nothing to declare anyway. So thank you.
All right, thanks. Crystal, we'll get back to you.
Great, thank you, Mr. Chair. I kind of want to go back to the conversation about enforcement, and I noticed that Mr. Gates put something in the chat as well on the Muni code. But my question is really in regard to if we're having issues with the police being able to ticket properly, it seems to me that we have encroachment issues that we ought to have the ability for code enforcement to actually enforce. And whether that's somebody leaving a couch on the sidewalk, or somebody leaving trash cans out on the sidewalk, or leaving a parked car on the sidewalk. So I guess my question is, what kind of things does enforcement have the capacity to ticket in terms of encroaching on our sidewalks? That would be my first question. Then I have another one. Thanks.
Who is that? Is that Jack Frost's question?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I believe it is. So there are several various items there. Trash cans are, we have the ability to, and we did a code change to be able to address those when they can be out. when they can be placed out, when they have to come back in, et cetera. And I think we're doing a pretty good job on that. Couch or trash dump, that's a street maintenance issue. That's not a code violation that code enforcement would. It's a maintenance issue as opposed to an enforcement issue. And parked vehicles on sidewalks are the jurisdiction of the Anchorage Police Department. They handle those through the community service officers, and I posted in the chat there. Typically, those are the first positions to be cut in budget cuts, and they do a phenomenal job if they're adequately staffed and can really make an impact on parking on sidewalks if that were the case.
So, Mr. Chair, can I just add a little more to that?
Sure, please do.
Okay, so Jack, so in other words, if somebody decided to use the sidewalk for part of their living area, say they decided in the summer to set up a barbecue grill and a picnic table, and they just use that as part of their living area, if you will, that would be an encroachment that would be ticketable as well, correct?
It depends on what. That's a hypothetical that has so many variables to it. We could probably and that there's another code amendment I'd like to eventually propose to be able to address that specifically. But between us and the CSOs, I believe we can usually, as long as it's not a homeless type situation, we can affect compliance on that. Homeless situations are handled entirely by APD because of the different variables of the impacts of that. So.
Okay. Well, again, I'm just trying to get a handle on at what point the municipality has the authority to do something with encroachment on the sidewalks. And then I noticed in one of the pictures that there was a significant amount of grass overgrowth on one of the sidewalks. It looked like it took up about half of the sidewalk. What kind of enforcement do we have on the sidewalks for people needing to get their yards, have their yards trimmed enough that they haven't basically eliminated part of the sidewalk for pedestrians?
We have code sections that we can, once we're made aware of that we can put the resources forth and get them cleared out so they're usable.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I have one more question and I'm not sure who it should be directed to.
Well, we got a big crowd here, so go ahead and toss it out there. See who bites.
Okay. This is in regard to the no parking signs. There was mention that they didn't want to put up no parking signs because then people wouldn't be able to park on the street either. But I wondered if we have any such thing as no parking on the sidewalks signs and if we've ever tried putting those up. Thanks.
This is John Crapsey, assistant acting traffic engineer. Through the chair, you know, there's a lot. It's very clear in Title IX that you're not allowed to park on the sidewalk, and we try not to put signs up like that. I don't ever remember us putting any signs up that say don't park on the sidewalk. I mean, that's something we could look into, but I think that you know, it's just like don't park in front of the fire hydrant, don't park in front of somebody's mailbox. We get a lot of requests for that too, and there's a lot of sign clutter out there. We have thousands and thousands of signs out there that we maintain, and I'd be hesitant to start a system of putting signs up everywhere on every sidewalk saying, you know, don't park on the sidewalk.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have other comments, but we'll just save it. Thanks.
Well, I don't, we'll talk about saving that, I guess. I don't know. I obviously bit off more than we can chew on this meeting because I had, we're also gonna look at the marijuana changes and licensing in Title 21, and I think we'll have to pass on that. So any spectators out there looking for that, we won't be getting to that. We have a little bit of time left here, and if we can, just check and see if there's anyone from the home builders. I'm not sure if Drew Cason or Bill Taylor or Eric Visser or anyone is there, but if there is, you can hit *6 and comment.
Mr. Chair, I'm in contact with them now. They're trying to set someone up.
Oh, okay. Thanks.
That's
I guess I have a couple questions I'll throw in, and then Crystal, we could get back to you in the meantime. There are some new subdivisions. I noticed the one, I think it's called Sand Hill off of Sand Lake Road, the new one, that appears to be close to 50 homes. So it would be the 580 T presumably. And it has all rolled curbs, as far as I could tell. I just did a quick ride through there. So even with the current rules, how would that be allowed?
Mr. Wilton, I can address that question for you. Sand Hill Reserve was actually approved under the old Title 21, which would have allowed rolled curbs. It's a new subdivision granted, but it was originally approved under the old Title 21.
Oh.
So effectively, it's grandfathered.
Okay, and that was Dave Whitfield?
Correct.
For the record. Interesting. Okay. All right, thanks. And then, I think our plans, we have, the memo, outlines the various things, and I think it's very legitimate and the points made, but we also have more affordable housing. So that's where the tension here is. And when you add, the various costs of, how many, we heard that the difference between roll curb and vertical is not a huge issue, but going in and changing the location and having to cut out vertical curb to put rolled curb and then go back and where you had roll curb, put vertical curb, that starts adding, would be thousands of dollars worth of work. And it's those thousands that add up to make a house more and more expensive. So, that's where the tension here is, try to find some balance on where this would kick in. And, Chris Schutte, you had mentioned you had a matrix of ways to deal with this. Is that, we really don't have a lot of time to get into that. Is that something you'd be prepared to show, like kind of another version, an S version, I guess, of this or something? That was to Chris Schutte.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, could you repeat that, please? I wasn't, I'm multitasking with the AMAS meeting. Could you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, you had mentioned that you had a matrix of possibilities for allowing rolled curbs versus vertical curbs or something, and we don't see it here. Is that something in the works, or what's the status on that?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So again, Chris Schutte, Director of Economic and Community Development. Matrix, I think, is a fancy term for the sort of decision or rational nexus that we're developing or going to propose. I know that Dean wanted to weigh in on the Title 21 process or what next steps may be, and I offered to get in the queue because part of the answer to your question is in what are the next steps. And so I hope that today was educational for the committee on the broader issue of subdivisions, curb types, and the role that those play in the broader sort of neighborhood context and community context. And recognizing that there are certain situations in which a different curb type is perfectly acceptable in certain applications, the assembled MOA professionals and representatives of the AHBA have talked about this issue in the past and developing criteria for when that would be triggered. I don't have something to show to you today because we spent some time this morning trying to come up with that and offer a suggestion on what a modification might look like to the proposed code language. Regrettably, we ran out of time, so we didn't add that to the presentation today. But that leads me to the next step, which is I think that if the group is amenable, we actually do have the seeds of what an acceptable, I guess, amendment to the code amendment you proposed, what would look like. But I'd like to workshop that with the home builders and with the MOA team first before we bring it back to the committee. And it would look something like a, maybe not a matrix, nothing as fancy as that, but it certainly would be a code amendment that identifies the criteria in which a type 1 versus type 2 would be a allowable default curb type. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, Chris, would you want to do that through this committee or have a work session?
I'll kind of defer to you and rest of the committee on that, and perhaps Dean. I would be fine with doing it through this committee since this is already something that you've been dealing with, but look to Dean's guidance as he just came off mute.
Okay, Dean, go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I note that this is specifically a code amendment to Title 21, and we do have in the code the procedures for amending Title 21. You know, with the marijuana regulation stuff, we've often just had the Assembly do it because the Assembly regulates that very, very closely. But everything else, Title 21, unless it's like a technical change or some cosmetic change or some oversight from the Title 21 rewrite, it doesn't go to planning and zoning, but everything else is supposed to be referred to the Planning and Zoning Commission for a code change. It seems like this would be appropriate to do. So I was noting that the process is outlined in Code Section 2103-210 for Title 21 text amendments, and the initiation under B1 is that an amendment to the text may be initiated by any review or decision-making body, and the process is for the planning director to do some departmental reviews and then send it to the Planning and Zoning Commission, note the staff report. Anyway, the initiation part, any review or decision-making body, the committee here isn't a decision-making body, but I think it is a reviewing body. So I kind of had the notion that maybe a good way to proceed was if this committee is ready to do it, make a motion to refer this to the Planning and Zoning Commission for their review and recommendations to the Assembly. And that would initiate this process outlined in 2103-210. When it gets to the Planning and Zoning Commission, they have a public hearing and they make findings. And I think that a lot of other people who weren't able to speak today will be able to speak there. Anyways, that's the full official process, and that could get kicked off, I think, by a motion from this committee. And I would be interested to hear if, Ms. McNulty or Mr. Schutte had comments on how that process works. But then another thought is maybe you're not ready to do that yet and you want to work on it more before sending it. That's fine, of course. If the committee wanted to work with, like Mr. Schutte had just suggested, a work group in the home builders to refine the proposal before sending it or referring it to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
My sense is I'd rather take another part of another meeting and see the proposal and then go ahead and do that. Are there any thoughts from the committee on that, Crystal?
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to see whatever it is that Mr. Schutte and staff can propose. I think there's just been a lot of nuances to this whole problem that have surfaced, including just enforcement and the fact that it sounds like we have about 3 different departments that have an enforcement role. So anyway, I think we could stand to have another meeting on this ourselves. Thanks.
And Mr. Chair.
Chris, go ahead.
I believe we have a rep from the home builders on now.
Okay, I got that. And so a rep from the home builders, *6 and identify yourself. And we just have a few minutes left and it sounds like we will continue this to another meeting. Thanks. Go ahead.
Hi,
We heard you for a moment.
This is Andre Spinelli. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, Andre.
Yeah, I just was jumped out of another meeting and onto this one. I really don't know. I haven't been privy. I didn't hear all the conversation leading up to it, but I guess I was just here to answer any questions if you had any. I'm assuming most people know that I'm from a developer standpoint. Most of the subdivisions, I did one of the first developments that utilized the type 1 curb, And out of all the curb in the subdivision, maybe less than 30% of it actually was a type 1 curb, and the rest were just transitions. And since then, the planning board has been approving variance after variance to not require them. I mean, I understand type 1 curbs make sense in older neighborhoods that have alley access, but for the smaller lots that are served with driveways off the main road, it's where it doesn't make a lot of sense. And I guess we just hope for some relief and change to the code. And that's all I have.
Okay, thanks. Well, it sounds like what we'll do is we'll have another meeting on this and look at a proposal that the administration said they'll working with you and others in the home builders. So we'll do that. I see a comment from Michelle McNulty regarding process. This will also have to go to the planning board in addition to planning and zoning commission. Okay, well, let's go ahead. I think we're probably finished on this for today. We'll do the marijuana stuff some other day and go ahead and we can talk about that process, Michelle, planning board and the planning and zoning commission. And I think make a note also that we just heard that, there's a lot of variances too, and just see, what those are for. That would be, I think, good for next discussion. Does that work for everyone? I'll make a quick call for general comments. I know Mr. Haberman's here. Okay, hearing no complaints. Public comments, Mr. Haberman?
Are we on audience participation?
That's you, yes, go ahead.
Okay. My name is Eugene Carr Haberman. 20 of my years, I lived in Anchorage. And part of those years, I couldn't like to say is, I remember being able to walk on a sidewalk all the way from, whether it's South Addition or 16th and K, all the way to my office on 3rd and K. There were sidewalks, and I used them well. I didn't have to be driving a car. I went to work and so forth. Anchorage, those sidewalks that were built back then predate Municipality of Anchorage establishment back in 75, good part of that area. But what has happened is the allowance of a development where sidewalks were not put out, and the type of curb was not really like was done in those neighbors I just mentioned. Now, what are we talking about? 2021, year 2021, and there's a debate about going into a rollout sidewalk, rollout curb, and away from what was good, sensible planning, and as a way to reduce costs. Well, what costs do we have reduced in the sense by the fact that we created a less livable situation in the community, both for work and recreation and so forth, and using, it's a little day, but it's been more difficult. People are more relying on cars, and those sidewalks and curbs need to be properly done and not go in the direction which is being proposed during this meeting and dealing with rollout sidewalks. We need to go back to what was sensible and not in the direction of being not sensible, and look at not an issue about cost and it's going to save a few bucks, but look how much cost it's already done, and dealing with safety, safe streets and safe sidewalks, children going to schools. Well, it's more than just children going. And then when Constance made a remark about snow, the fact is it's a responsibility of people who've got sidewalks to clear the sidewalks. And the fact is, even during winter, we need to address that and have a cooperation that those sidewalks are cleared for people to walk and not have to walk in the streets. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Haberman. Is there anyone else, general public? You can hit *6. Okay, not hearing anyone. I believe we're ready to adjourn.
Oh, Mr. Chair, quickly.
Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, reply to one thing there. So in the ideal world, neighbors would clear the snow from their sidewalk. The code only requires that in the downtown, I think. And the problem is Sisyphus task. As soon as you clear the sidewalk, the grader comes and plows the snow back up. And then before you know it, you have 6 feet of snow piled up and no way to physically move it off of your property, because your property is essentially the municipal snow dump. And so anyhow, just wanted to make sure that people understood it. It isn't so simple as thinking this idealistic world of the neighbors should just clear their sidewalks. It's Sisyphus's burden.
Right, thank you. On that, let's adjourn. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.